Hello YouTube, my name is Paul. Hope you're all keeping well. Welcome back to part 2 of my Q&A videos where I talk about collection, or my collection, and how it all started. So it probably won't be as long as the previous video. But yeah, what I'll do is I'll go through the questions. I'll probably give you a bit of an introduction first as to why or what started it in the first place. One of the very first questions I had was from Sega Zombie, Scott. And he asked, how long have you been collecting? Now, I probably started collecting before I realised what I was doing, to be completely honest with you. It'll kind of make sense in a minute, but in 1994, that's when I started to buy games, especially old games. It was a bit of a strange era. I mean, not only was I in my own place for the first time in my life, coming out of that adolescence period and sort of having more responsibility, there was an era where the gaming scene had changed dramatically in the UK. So what I grew up with was at an end really, because Commodore went bust that year and all the systems that I remember and loved were long gone. I mean, the Super Nintendo and the Sega Mega Drive was still there in their last sort of twilight years, if you like. There were systems coming out like the 3DO, which to be honest didn't really appeal to me, and the one thing I would have loved would have been a PC, but they were too expensive. So yeah, I remember that quite well, because I remember going to a computer show in 1994, and at the show there wasn't much. It was a very sterile environment, very different to the one I went to 5 years before at Earls Court, and it was fantastic things. You had lots of major British publishers which no longer existed, sort of the companies you grew up with. And being a patriotic kind of guy, it was quite sad to see, really. Remember seeing a massive Ocean screen, like a cinema screen, which was running Batman the movie on it. But yeah, games that I was really hyped up to buy, and that didn't exist in the later show either. But yeah, this old show was very much like what we get now in the retro games events, where you got loads and loads of market traders. So you had a blend of these massive companies and small sellers selling games, and the atmosphere was absolutely fantastic. So yeah, it was a massive difference over those 5 years, and I kind of missed that era. So not only did I have my own place, I had a huge nostalgia for that particular era, especially times when you used to go and buy your games for next to nothing. Well, you used to have to save up your pennies to buy the games, or I did anyway. When I got my first part-time job and bought more games, and it was just a simpler time. I suppose I missed that. But the most important thing, I suppose, was the fact I got hold of a Sinclair Spectrum Plus 2, which was my original. So I sold that to my brother, which I spent on something else, I think relating to my Atari ST at the time. But yeah, so I did that. I got hold of the system. My friend got me another one, which we put the two broken ones together and managed to get a working Plus 2. My brother brought back a whole bag of games as well, my original games. So unfortunately, all the cassette inlays were missing, and it's just a bloody mess. But luckily, across the road, a guy was selling in his shop Hit Squad games and Kicks games and stuff like that, GBH, all the budget labels from the publishing houses of yesteryear. So I used to go there and buy as much as I could for my Spectrum. I think I must have amassed about 40 or 50 games over sort of a 24 month period. So that was the very beginnings of it. And it was very difficult to get older games back then as well. I didn't have any car boots to go to. I grew up in Brixton in South London, and car boot wasn't really a thing you'd go to. You had jumble sales, again, you wouldn't be seen dead at one, so I never went to them, which was my bad, because if I think back now, I think about these guys who did all that and got all those massive collections back in the 90s. I do think back to myself and think, why not I do that? But I never thought of it. That's the truth of it. So the only way I can get games was by asking friends, and it's surprising how many people got rid of their old systems. So that was more difficult than I thought. Remember a young lad I worked with, he used to bring his discs in that he used to nick from his dad to give to me, until his dad gave him a bollocking one day, and that sauce dried up really. I remember getting Outrun Europa from him, Robocop 2. I think there were only two he might have given me actually. Another bloke who upgraded to a PC gave me a few of his ST games, because I bought an ST again that year as well from Silica. It was about 100 quid. I think I still got a receipt for that kicking around downstairs. So yeah, it's quite difficult to source games, because again, there weren't really many charity shops back then. There was one or two, but you just won't be seen in them. So yeah. Well, I think there was a shop as well in Victoria I used to pick up games from, Victoria Station. There was a shop when I used to visit my parents up in Wales, who moved there the same year actually I started collecting. So yeah, so pick up games from all different places, but there was not a single major place I picked games from for another 5 years, and that was on eBay. So yeah, I had my Spectrum, which was repaired. I had my ST. My Amiga I still had up until about 1997. But at that point, it still wasn't a collection. I wasn't collecting games. I was just buying back, essentially, an era that I dearly missed. And then, yeah, some years later, discovered eBay. And then, you know what that's like. You sort of imagine going into a massive shop full of retro games when you first started out, and just went absolutely berserk. You start flipping, buy this, buy that. I mean, there was no such thing as buy it now as then. I think buyers and sellers could leave each other negative feedback. There was no fees to list stuff. It was very simple. So the first thing I bought from eBay was a Sinclair Spectrum rubber key, which I always wanted back because that's what my auntie had years ago. I remember that took 4 weeks to arrive. I bought loads of Spectrum tapes. I remember they used to get delivered through the letterbox and just in pieces of plastic, a bit like the PlayStation games I mentioned a couple of videos ago. So there was no rules and regulations really on eBay, which is a free-for-all. But I remember this chap called Ralphie 500. He was a guy who used to sell a lot of retro game stuff back then. And he had a link to his website where he's got his collection. I was really intrigued, so I went on it and I thought, bloody hell, there's actually such a thing as collecting games. And it was called a retro gaming as well, which I didn't know that. It was all new to me. So that would have been, what, 19 years ago. Because before eBay, I mean, apart from the place I told you about, I used to go online and look for shops online, which there weren't many. There was very few. I mean, I remember Format Computing being one, which I picked up a few Amiga discs from. But it's very limited in supply for what I could buy. But eBay was just amazing. So that was kind of the start of the collection expanding quite wildly, and that went on for about 4 years. And I think I amassed during that time 2,600 games. Now the games I bought, I bought games on many systems that were many duplicates. I think I had about 900 Spectrum games because that was one of my favourite machines. I had about 600 Amiga, 400 ST, but I had the same copies of games across all different formats. And it took up a hell of a lot of room. I remember everything being boxed up in this particular room. And that room, unfortunately, when the heating didn't work very well, so you had to keep looking after the radiator, otherwise the room got quite damp quite quick. And due to personal circumstances, I kind of left my partner then and moved to Cornwall, which is where I live now. But I left the collection there, and the collection sat there for another 5 years before I brought it home, down here. And when I brought it home, I just literally put it in a spare room, and that's where it remained for another 3 years. But yeah, so what prompted me was I sold the whole lot off, but what prompted me to do that is I tested loads of games out, especially the Amiga, just to see if they worked. And about 1 in 3 didn't. So unfortunately I threw them away. Nowadays they'll probably fetch a pretty penny because people buy broken games. But yeah, so I tested the games out. The ones that worked I listed on eBay. So I listed my entire collection in the form of a shop. So I did that for a number of years. I had my eBay shop up and running from 2012 to about 2017. So yeah, the intention was just to sell the whole lot. But in 2013 the bug returned. I thought to myself, do you know what, I'm going to collect 4 systems that I never had before, very obscure systems. Well, not very obscure, but they're not easy to collect for. So I chose the Mega CD, 32X, CD32 and GX4000. So that was my initial aim, was just those 4 systems. So I managed to complete 2 full sets. 2 of them I'm very close to completing, but they're 2 of the hardest PAL sets you can probably go for. And then of course nostalgia bug returned again, and it was like, okay, here we go. There's Spectrum, ST came back, the Amiga came back, Mega Drive came back. I thought, bloody hell, it's going to be out of control again. So the next aim was then to go onto Retro Collect and think, right, I'm going to go and pick out the Mega Drive, Sega Saturn and Dreamcast. I'm going to pick out all the extremely rare and very rare games, and that's what I'm going to collect, which is a collection that I achieved. I actually managed to do that, and subsequently sold the Dreamcast stuff off. But yeah, it kind of evolved like that. So yeah, my initial collection would have been from 94 to 2004, but most of that period I didn't realise what I was doing. I was just buying back old games. And the current collection's been going since 2013, which has been more targeted than the previous collection, but it's still running out 1900 games. It's slightly smaller than what I had before. So do you ever see an end point to your collection, or will it continue to evolve? The Man Cave and retro games played badly Birdsall. Dave. The answer to that is no. I'm still finding games now that I've forgotten about years ago. And there are systems I'd love to go back and collect for. I mean, I really would love to have a full Sega set. Sega? Slap myself across the face. Full Sega set. Watching too much Last Gamer, that is. But yeah, I'd like to go from the Game Gear Master System right the way through to the Dreamcast. That's what I'd love to do, but that's a very tall order. I mean, fair enough, I've got quite a few of the games I need to get that set. But A, I'm lacking the space. B, I might even be lacking the motivation to do that. It's just I want to finish off what I've got at the moment. But if money was no object and space was no object, I'd carry on. I'd be like the Last Game. I'd be flipping all over the place and have everything I want. But another thing I'd like to collect is Japanese Mega Drive games, Japanese Saturn games, and a PC Engine. So there are those systems that I would contemplate collecting for. So I don't think it will ever stop unless I sold up for the last final time. How long have you been collecting? That was Sega Zombies question. So yeah, 25 years. How many games do you reckon you have? I've got about 1900. That was asked by David Campbell and Gears of Games. So yeah, 1900. So it's a smaller collection, but more focused. A lot more focused. How many systems do you have? I was quite surprised when I added them up the other day. I got 29. 29 systems. There are a couple of duplicates in there. I got like 2 plus 2As. No, 2 plus 2s. A couple of Atari STs, but they're variants of the same system, if you like. But yeah, I was quite surprised. And the question I had sort of bolted onto that really was, do you rate software much higher than hardware? The question is that's no. And the reason why, and that question was asked by WB. So do you rate software much higher than hardware? E.g. you've said in the past you'd love an Amiga 4000, which I would, but they're too expensive. But you have a number of games that cost more than the 4000 on their own. Now I'd love a 4000, but that system for me would have to be set up, and I do not have the space to set up a 4000. And the box, I've had a box that it comes in before, and it's a massive box. I've got nowhere to put it, to be completely honest. I definitely would love one. It's something I would love definitely to get hold of, but A, it would need to be recapped, battery changed, it would need to be completely serviced, so I can use it, because obviously it's an expensive investment, and it breaks and I don't know what the hell to do with it. And the Falcon, I missed out on a Falcon a few years ago. There was a Falcon listed in Luton, where I had sort of family in Luton at the time, for 400 quid, and it looked like it was in mint condition. As good old Dale Boy once said, he who dares wins, he who hesitates don't. And that was me. I hesitated and it went. So that was a bit of a shocker really, but yeah, I rate software higher in the fact I'd get more use out of it, because if I had all the hardware I wanted, I probably wouldn't use any of it, to be completely honest, because I haven't got the space to set it all up. Because the only thing I have set up is the PC, and every now and then I'll take an old system downstairs to use, to my missus's horror, but sometimes you've got to do it. But yeah, so I don't. So that was that question. How much do you reckon you spent on this hobby? I've got no idea, Dave. That's David Campbell. I really don't know. It's going to be 5 figures, I'll tell you no lies. And the reason for that is a lot of the games that I want you very rarely find in bundles, because initially my collection came solely from bundles, because I had that kind of mentality when I had my shop that I had to recoup the money if I was going to keep the games, which I did, and I did that for much of the Mega Drive, much of the Saturn was like that, most of the Mega CD was like that, the Amiga. It's only really when I've sort of targeted particular games that has cost me the money, and the collector's editions, because no one on earth is going to have a bundle of collector's editions for sale. It's very unlikely, because it's a nightmare to post. So yeah, I have spent a lot of money on it, but less than it's probably worth, to be honest. So yeah, I don't know exactly what I spent. I have written it all down somewhere. Every time I buy something I do make a note of it, but I've never sat and go, I wonder how much I've spent. Someone asked me about insurance. I was Cindy Steve. Yes, the collection is insured, mate. I'm not going to say how much for, because it is a little personal. But yeah, I suggest you do collect like this, you should have your collection insured. So how much is your whole collection worth to you? I.e., what would someone have to offer you to sell it in one go? Again, not really thought about it. And I'll be completely honest, that was from WB. If someone said to me, here is substantially more than you think your collection is worth, right? I would sell it, simply because my health, well-being and future security is more important than its games collection. But it'd have to be more than it's worth, because I could quite easily do that and then go back and buy the nostalgia games that I want. So this collection is expendable. It's not something that I think to myself, oh my god, I'm never going to sell it. But if something happened where actually my mortgage was paid off, I had no debt or nothing at all, and I could live my life, I suppose, with less worry and stress, of course I'm going to do it. Who wouldn't? Who wouldn't do that? So yeah, it's not it is an expendable collection, but it's not something I would choose to sell unless it was going to do that to my life, if that makes sense. That was WB. Also asked me about the systems I've set up permanently, which I don't have any set up permanently, just the PC. So yeah, quite a few questions from WB there, really. So what is this madness all about? I kind of touched on that in the beginning, really. It's very much nostalgia. That's what drove me in the first place. Then it became more of a challenge, I suppose. I picked games that, like I said about the Retro Collect site, I wanted to go for games which are difficult to get. I made it interesting, I suppose. It's not that collecting games isn't that interesting, because there's a lot of history attached to them, but I wanted to find games that were obscure. I wanted my collection to be a bit different to other people's out there. I wanted to be unique to me and kind of trace back my own gaming history from the Atari right to the present day, PS4. So I still play modern games today. But yeah, and also, I mean, recently it's more, as I've done YouTube as well, that's been another bolt on to the collecting. And obviously going to events and meeting some fantastic people, which again is all relatively new to myself. I've only been to the one event that I've met loads of people at. And I went to the Bristol Gaming Market and met a few people there too, but that's kind of another bolt on to the whole thing. So nostalgia, challenge, I think curiosity, because there's a lot of stuff out there that I've never seen before. Well, I've never really played on Nintendo machines, ever. That's something I'd love to do, because actually so many amazing games came out in that system. Probably some of the best games ever made came out in that system. But we've only got so much time on our hands, haven't we? So yeah, it's difficult. So I've kind of gone down a route I've gone, but I'd like to try different things out within the hobby. So that's it really. Nostalgia challenge, meeting great people, the YouTube stuff, and learning. Just learning about the hobby I love. And the final question was, have you experienced collector burnout? Many times, I've got to say, many times. Recently, quite recently actually, the last time was because, like I said, you spend so much time looking for so few games, you question, is it worth it? So I come off Facebook as part of that sort of burnout really, because you're on Facebook, you're on eBay, you're going through websites for different sort of online shops. I mean, I don't go to car boots, I don't go to charity shops, although I did go to a couple within the last couple of months just to see what was out there. But I suppose because time is so finite, it can get frustrating in that respect, because you're sort of sitting there looking at stuff and you're not having a fruitful time, where you could be playing some games. And that is the whole point of really why I started collecting, because I love playing games. So there are times like that. So there is times where you're kind of also thinking about the wallet. You think, shit, a lot of it actually is related to stress, to be honest with you. You know what I mean? So financial stress, space, you got stuff all around the friggin' house, and Mrs. going, what are you doing? I don't mind you collecting what you're collecting, but get the shit out of my fucking house into that bloody games room. So there's many different reasons why, but I think they're all attributed to some kind of stress, aren't they? So it could be financial, space and time, which are the three key ingredients into collecting. So trying to find a balance between the lot is probably the key. And the social aspect of it for me is certainly quite new, and I think that will add another dimension which will probably help, because there's other people out there who experience exactly the same as you. But yeah, hope that helped some of the questions really. Again, quite an awkward one to kind of describe, but my memory is kind of fuzzy these days. So I've got another two I want to do. Well, one more really, which is the miscellaneous questions. A lot of people have asked lots of questions, and there's probably 24 questions in there, so it'll just be quite a short fire session really. There's one around top systems and games, and I'll probably do that while I do the next batch of collection videos. I'll just talk about my favourite games. And but one question was, what's my favourite game of all time? And that was Mike, Without Further Ado Retro. That's a flipping tough one to answer. That really is. So I have to really give that one some thought. But yeah, so thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed that video. Kind of a bit of an insight really into what I do, So yeah, so thank you very much for subscribing. Thank you very much for all the comments you're leaving. They are fantastic. And I'll see you guys again real soon. So take care and bye for now.